Poor ranchers saved two giant Apache sisters. Next day their chief returned with a shocking decision. The storm had passed, but what Ezekiel Marsh found in his yard defied all logic. Two Apache women lay unconscious near his dying cattle, but these weren't ordinary women. They were giants among their people, each standing taller than most men when upright. The shorter one still towered over 6 feet, her powerful frame built for warfare and survival. The taller one was massive, nearly 7 feet of solid muscle and bone, her shoulders broader than any settler Ezekiel had ever seen. Apache women this size were legends whispered around frontier fires, warrior daughters of chiefs, trained from birth to fight like men, but carrying the sacred responsibility of continuing bloodlines. They never traveled alone. They never appeared on failing ranches without entire war parties following behind. The giant women wore intricate beadwork that marked them as highborn, their jewelry worth more than Ezekiel's entire property. Blood seeped through the shorter one's torn clothing, while the taller one's breathing came in labored gasps. Both had taken serious injuries fleeing from something, or someone, dangerous enough to separate them from their protection. Every survival instinct Ezekiel possessed screamed one truth: helping Apache meant death for settlers like him. That was the iron law of this unforgiving frontier. But when the massive woman's eyes opened and locked onto his, Ezekiel saw something that shattered every assumption he'd held about Apache warriors. Not fury or hatred, but desperate human fear. The same terror he'd felt watching his ranch slowly die, knowing he was powerless to stop it. She tried to speak, her voice deep and strong despite her injuries, but managed only a whisper in her native tongue before consciousness faded again. Standing over two fallen giants who could crush him with their bare hands, Ezekiel realized that what he did in the next few minutes would either mark him as the biggest fool on the frontier, or reveal a strength he never knew he possessed. The choice that would change everything came down to 3 minutes and 2 dying giants. Ezekiel knelt beside the unconscious Apache women, his hands trembling as he assessed their injuries. Even lying down, their size was intimidating. The shorter one's frame stretched nearly 6.5 feet, her muscled arms thicker than most men's legs. The taller one was a true giant, probably close to 7 feet tall, her broad shoulders spanning wider than Ezekiel's doorway. Both carried the lean muscle of trained warriors, their bodies built for combat and survival in harsh frontier conditions. The shorter giant had taken something sharp to her ribs, maybe a branch, maybe something worse. Dark blood stained the earth beneath her massive frame, and her breathing rattled with each exhale. The taller one had a gash across her forehead, but her eyes remained alert, watching his every move with dangerous intensity that reminded him these women could snap his neck without effort. His ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, 40 from town. Out here, helping Apache meant signing his own death warrant if other settlers discovered it. Men had been hanged for less, accused of collaboration, of choosing sides in a war that showed no mercy to either. The wounded giant's breathing grew shallower. Ezekiel had seen enough dying cattle to recognize the signs. She had maybe an hour, possibly less. "Please," the conscious giant whispered in broken English, her voice carrying a deep, commanding tone that made clear she was accustomed to being obeyed. "Help, sister." Ezekiel's throat tightened. The word sister hit him like a physical blow, bringing back memories of his own sister Elizabeth, lost to fever 3 winters ago. But looking at these two massive women, he realized they represented something far more dangerous than family loyalty. They were Apache royalty, warrior daughters whose disappearance would bring entire war parties hunting for answers. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching fast, and 2 giants would die in his yard if he did nothing. His neighbors would find the bodies eventually, probably assume he'd killed them defending his property. That story would protect him, maybe even earn him respect in town. But as he stared into the conscious woman's face, high cheekbones weathered by wind, dark eyes that held no pleading, only resigned acceptance, Ezekiel felt something crack inside his chest. This wasn't about Apache or settlers. This was about 2 human beings bleeding out in front of him while he calculated the cost of his soul. "Damn it," he muttered, sliding his arms under the wounded giant's shoulders. She was impossibly heavy, solid muscle beneath torn fabric, her unconscious body weighing more than a full-grown steer. The conscious giant struggled to her feet, swaying but determined to help carry her sister. Her own imposing height making Ezekiel feel like a child beside her. Together, they maneuvered toward his cabin. Each step felt like walking toward a cliff, the wounded woman's weight nearly crushing him despite the healthy giant's assistance. Behind them, the wind picked up, bringing the scent of rain and something else, dust clouds that might mean riders approaching from the southern ridge. As they reached his doorway, Ezekiel realized his cabin entrance was too narrow for the wounded giant's broad shoulders. They would have to turn her sideways, careful not to worsen her injuries. "They come," the conscious giant whispered, her grip tightening on her sister's legs as she looked toward the horizon. Soon, the riders appeared on the ridge like wolves hunting wounded prey. Ezekiel pressed his back against the cabin wall, peering through a crack in his shutters. 5 Apache warriors sat motionless on their horses, scanning the valley below. Even from this distance, he could see the war paint streaking their faces and the rifles slung across their backs. "Your sister," he whispered to the conscious woman, who had introduced herself as Ayanna. "What did she do? Why are they hunting you?" Ayanna's jaw tightened as she pressed a torn cloth against her sister's wound. Itzel spoke against marriage. Chief's son wanted her as wife. She said no. The simplicity of it hit Ezekiel like a punch to the gut. A woman refusing marriage, and now both sisters were marked for death or capture. He thought of his own freedom to choose, to say no, to walk away from anything he didn't want. These women had no such luxury. Through the window, he watched the lead warrior raise his hand, pointing directly at Ezekiel's cabin. They had found the blood trail. "How many bullets you have?" Ayanna asked quietly, checking the knife on her belt with practiced efficiency. Ezekiel counted his ammunition. 12 rounds for his rifle, 6 for his pistol, against 5 experienced fighters who knew this terrain better than he ever would. Not enough, he admitted. Itzel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. She spoke in rapid Apache to her sister, her voice urgent despite her weakness. Ayanna's expression darkened with each word. "What did she say?" Ezekiel demanded. "Warriors not here for us," Ayanna said slowly. "Here for you." The words made no sense. Ezekiel had never wronged the Apache, never stolen their land or killed their people. His ranch sat on territory purchased legally from the territorial government, though he knew that meant little to those who had lived here first. "Why me?" Ayanna studied his face with those sharp dark eyes, as if measuring whether he could handle the truth. Outside, the warriors began their descent toward his cabin, moving with the deadly patience of experienced hunters. 3 moons ago, Apache girl found near death by river. White man brought her to our village, left her with medicine and food. Never gave name, never asked payment. She paused, watching recognition dawn in his eyes. "You remember now." Ezekiel's breath caught. The girl by the creek, maybe 14 years old, half drowned and burning with fever. He'd found her while checking his water traps, stayed with her until she was strong enough to travel, then guided her toward Apache territory before riding away. He'd never told anyone, never expected gratitude or recognition. "She was Chief's daughter," Ayanna continued. "Chief Nalnish swore blood debt to unnamed white man who saved her life. But some warriors say no debt owed to settlers. They come to test truth of her story." The sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Ezekiel realized with growing horror that this wasn't about the women he'd just sheltered. This was about a debt he never knew existed, a life he'd saved without understanding the consequences. Outside his door, the horses stopped. A voice called out in Apache, demanding and authoritative. Ayanna reached for his arm, her fingers strong and warm against his skin. "What you do next," she said quietly, "decides if you live as friend or die as enemy." The door shook under a heavy fist, and a voice called out in English, "White man, we know you inside. Come out now." Ezekiel's hands trembled as he gripped his rifle. Beside him, Ayanna helped her sister sit up against the wall, both women preparing for whatever violence might come. Itzel was pale but alert, her dark eyes fixed on the door with grim determination. "I go out, they might kill me," Ezekiel whispered. "I stay inside. They'll burn us all out." "No burn," Ayanna said firmly. "They test your courage, not seek war. Apache way." Another voice joined the first, younger and more aggressive. "You help women who defy Chief's son. This makes you enemy of Apache people." Ezekiel recognized the trap. If he admitted to helping Ayanna and Itzel, he sided against the chief's son. If he denied it, he lied to warriors who had already seen evidence of his actions. Either path led to death, but Ayanna's next words changed everything. "Tell them truth about River Girl. Tell them your name." She was asking him to claim the blood debt, to identify himself as the man who had saved the chief's daughter. It meant gambling his life on the word of a 14-year-old girl from months ago, betting that her father valued honor above politics. The pounding grew more insistent. Through the window, Ezekiel saw two warriors moving toward his small barn where his horses were kept. They were running out of time. "My name is Ezekiel Marsh," he called through the door, his voice carrying farther than he expected. "3 moons ago, I pulled Chief Nalnish's daughter from the creek waters and brought her home safely." Silence fell outside. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. When the voice came again, it was different, older, more measured. "Show yourself, Ezekiel Marsh. Bring the women." Ayanna nodded to him, then helped her sister to her feet. Itzel swayed but stayed upright, her hand pressed against her bandaged ribs. Together, the 3 of them approached the door. Ezekiel lifted the wooden bar and pulled the door open. 5 Apache warriors sat their horses in his yard, war paint sharp across their faces. But now he could see something else in their expressions. Uncertainty, maybe even respect. The leader, a man with gray threading through his black hair, studied Ezekiel with intense curiosity. "You are smaller than daughter described," the warrior said. "She said white man was giant who fought river spirits." Despite everything, Ezekiel almost smiled. Children always made stories larger than life. "I'm just a rancher. Found her caught in fallen branches, helped her get free." The leader's gaze shifted to Ayanna and Itzel. "These women brought shame to Chief's son. Why do you help them?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ezekiel felt the weight of 3 lives balancing on his next words. Around him, the other warriors waited, hands resting on their weapons. "Because they needed help," he said simply. "Same reason I helped your chief's daughter." The gray-haired warrior studied him for a long moment, then turned his horse toward the others. They spoke in rapid Apache, their voices low but urgent. When they finished, the leader looked back at Ezekiel with something that might have been approval. "Chief Nalnish comes at sunrise," he announced. "He will decide if blood debt covers women's defiance. You will wait." The longest night of Ezekiel's life stretched ahead like a death sentence waiting for dawn. After the warriors disappeared into the darkness, he helped Ayanna change her sister's bandages by lamplight. Itzel's wound had stopped bleeding, but infection remained a real threat. The torn flesh along her ribs looked angry and swollen, though she never complained. "Will he kill me?" Ezekiel asked quietly, watching Ayanna work with practiced hands. "Your chief? Nalnish is fair man," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "But his son has many friends among warriors. They say marriage to Itzel would bring peace between clans." She paused, testing the tightness of a knot. Peace worth more than one white man's life. The brutal honesty hit harder than any threat. Ezekiel understood politics. He'd seen how quickly alliances shifted when survival was at stake. His death might be the price of tribal harmony. "Why did she refuse?" he asked, nodding toward Itzel, who dozed fitfully against the cabin wall. Ayanna's expression hardened. "Chief's son took 3 wives already, beat 2 until they lost babies." Itzel saw what happens to women who cannot say no. She met his eyes directly. "Some things worse than death." They worked in silence after that, the weight of morning pressing down like storm clouds. Outside, coyotes called across the valley, their voices sharp with hunger. Ezekiel found himself counting the hours, wondering if he'd live to hear them again. Near midnight, Itzel stirred awake, her fever finally breaking. She spoke softly to her sister in Apache, then turned to Ezekiel with clear, intelligent eyes. "Thank you," she said in careful English, "for helping when help brings danger." "Anyone would have done the same," Ezekiel replied. Both women exchanged a look that suggested otherwise. "White men help Apache before," Itzel continued slowly, "but never risk life for women who bring trouble. You different." Ayanna stood, moving to the window to check the horizon. "Different may be why you still alive when Chief comes. Maybe why he listened to daughter's words about Riverman. Or maybe why he kills me quick instead of slow," Ezekiel said, trying for humor, but hearing the fear in his own voice. Ayanna turned back to him, and in the lamplight he caught something in her expression that made his breath catch. Not pity or gratitude, but recognition, as if she saw something in him that he didn't see in himself. "Itzel and we watch you tonight. Watch how you move, how you think, how you choose." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell sage in her hair and see the strength in her dark eyes. "You not like other white men we know." The observation hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Ezekiel felt heat rise in his chest, an attraction he had no right to feel with death approaching at sunrise. A sound outside made them all freeze, horses moving slow and steady through the darkness. Too early for the chief, but too late for friendly visitors. Ayanna pressed against the window, her body tense as a drawn bowstring. 3 riders. Not Apache. Her voice dropped to urgent whisper. White men with badges. Ezekiel's stomach turned to ice. If settlers had discovered Apache women in his cabin, morning's confrontation with Chief Nalnish would be the least of his worries. Outside, a familiar voice called through the night. "Marsh, we know you're in there. Come out slow, hands where we can see them." Deputy Marshal William Kane stepped into the lamplight, his badge catching the glow like a warning. Behind him, 2 other lawmen spread out across Ezekiel's yard, their hands resting on their gun belts with practiced ease. "Marsh, we got reports of Apache in this area," Kane announced, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. "Tracking party says they headed this direction after attacking the Morrison place." Ezekiel's blood went cold. If the Morrison ranch had been hit, settlers would be screaming for Apache blood. Any Apache found would be shot on sight. No questions asked. Behind him, he sensed Ayanna's massive frame tensing in the doorway, nearly 7 feet of trained warrior ready to fight if necessary. Even wounded, she was more dangerous than all 3 lawmen combined. Itzel remained motionless against the wall, but her giant form coiled with barely contained power despite her injuries. "Haven't seen any Apache," Ezekiel said, stepping outside and pulling the door closed behind him. His body felt small and inadequate blocking the entrance, knowing that 2 women each capable of crushing these men with their bare hands waited inside. Kane studied him with suspicious eyes. "That's so. Because there's blood on your porch, Marsh. Fresh blood, and a lot of it." He gestured to one of his men, who immediately began examining the dark stains in the dirt. "Cut myself chopping wood," Ezekiel lied smoothly. "Axe slipped on wet wood, caught my arm." "Show me the cut," Kane demanded. Ezekiel's mind raced. He could fake an injury, maybe use his knife to create a fresh wound, but Kane was no fool. A federal marshal would spot the difference between old blood and new, between injury and fabrication. "Deputy," called the man examining the bloodstains. "This ain't from one person. Different patterns, different amounts. And these footprints?" He pointed to impressions in the mud. "These are huge, bigger than any settler I've seen." Kane's eyes narrowed as he studied the massive footprints that clearly belonged to the giant Apache sisters. "What kind of people you been hosting here?" "Marsh? Don't know what you mean," Ezekiel replied, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Kane drew his pistol. "Step away from that door. We're searching your place." "You got a warrant?" Ezekiel asked. Though he knew it didn't matter. Out here, federal marshals made their own law, especially when hunting Apache. "Don't need one for Indian killers," Kane replied coldly. "Stand aside." Ezekiel knew he had seconds before they discovered Ayanna and Itzel. Once that happened, all 3 of them were dead. The giant women for being Apache, him for harboring enemies of the territory. But as Kane stepped toward the door, Ezekiel made a desperate decision. "Wait," he called out. "You're right. There are Apache here. 2 women badly injured. They came seeking help." Kane's gun swung toward him. "You admit to harboring hostiles?" "I admit to helping 2 dying human beings," Ezekiel said firmly. "Same as I do for anyone else." The marshal's face twisted with disgust. "Apache sympathizer. You'll hang for this, Marsh." Behind the door, Ezekiel heard movement, the giant sisters preparing for battle. But before anyone could act, one of Kane's men called out urgently from the ridge. "Marshal, riders approaching from the north. Too dark to see how many." Kane spun toward the sound, his weapon forgotten for the moment. In the distance, the sound of approaching horses grew steadily louder. "Could be more Apache," Kane muttered, then raised his voice to his men. "Defensive positions. We'll settle with Marsh after we see who's coming." As the lawmen scrambled for cover, Ezekiel realized that reinforcements were arriving. But whether they came as salvation or doom would depend entirely on who rode through the darkness toward his cabin. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, carrying with it the weight of judgment that would arrive with the dawn. The riders that appeared in the darkness weren't Apache. They were more federal agents, reinforcements that Kane had called for backup. "Marshal Kane!" the lead rider called out, dismounting quickly. "We've got orders from the territorial governor. All Apache harbored by settlers are to be brought in for questioning about the Morrison killings." Kane's confidence returned with the additional support. Now 6 armed lawmen surrounded Ezekiel's property, making resistance impossible. "Search every building," Kane ordered. "Bring out anyone you find." Ezekiel's heart pounded as he realized his confession had doomed them all. Within minutes, Ayanna and Itzel would be discovered, and all 3 of them would be dead or imprisoned. But Ayanna surprised everyone by stepping out of the cabin voluntarily, her massive frame filling the doorway before she emerged into the lamplight. Even the hardened marshals stepped back involuntarily. None had ever seen an Apache woman of her size and bearing. She carried herself like royalty, her nearly 7-foot frame moving with deadly grace despite her injuries. "I am Ayanna, daughter of Chief Nalnish," she announced in clear English. "This man saved my sister's life when she was dying. Apache law protects those who show mercy to our people." Itzel followed her sister outside, her own imposing height and muscled frame making the marshals exchange nervous glances. These weren't ordinary Apache women. They were giants among their people, trained warriors who could kill with their bare hands. Kane raised his rifle toward the sisters. "Apache law doesn't mean anything to federal marshals. You're coming with us." "No," Ayanna said simply, her deep voice carrying absolute authority. "We are not." "You don't have a choice," Kane replied, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Something about these giant women's confidence suggested they knew something he didn't. Ayanna smiled, a cold expression that reminded Ezekiel of her father. "My father comes at sunrise. He will speak for us then. Until sunrise, we remain under protection of blood debt owed to this man." "What blood debt?" Kane demanded. Itzel stepped forward, her massive frame casting shadows across the yard. 3 moons ago, white ranchers saved Chief's youngest daughter from drowning. Apache law says life debt must be honored. This man called in debt tonight when he helped us." The marshals exchanged glances. They had heard of Apache blood debts, sacred obligations that even war parties honored. But they had never encountered a situation where a white settler could claim such protection. "That's Indian superstition," Kane said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Federal law supersedes tribal customs." "Does it?" Ayanna asked quietly. "Then explain why territorial governors signed treaty last winter recognizing Apache legal customs in matters involving tribal members." Kane's face went pale. The treaty was real, a political necessity to avoid all-out war. If these women were really Chief Nalnish's daughters, and if Ezekiel could prove he'd saved another daughter, then federal law would be forced to recognize the blood debt until the chief himself could rule on it. "We'll wait until morning," Kane finally said. "But if your father doesn't show, or if his decision doesn't satisfy federal requirements, all 3 of you are coming with us." As the marshals established a perimeter around the property, Ezekiel realized that everything now depended on what Chief Nalnish would decide when he arrived with the sun. The giant sisters had bought them one night, but morning would bring judgment that could mean life or death for all of them. Ayanna moved closer to Ezekiel, her imposing presence both protective and comforting. "Father is wise man," she said quietly. "But wisdom sometimes requires difficult choices." Looking at the armed men surrounding his property, Ezekiel understood that Chief Nalnish's decision wouldn't just determine their fate, it would set precedent for how Apache and federal law interacted on the frontier. As the long night wore on, all they could do was wait for sunrise and hope that wisdom would prove stronger than politics when judgment finally came. Dawn broke with the sound of approaching horses, exactly as Ayanna had promised. Ezekiel stood in his doorway, exhausted from a sleepless night spent watching federal marshals patrol his property. The giant sisters had maintained their vigil beside him, their imposing frame serving as both protection and reminder of what was at stake. Marshal Kane emerged from behind his makeshift barricade, rifle ready as dust clouds appeared on the northern horizon. "That better be your chief," he called to Ayanna, "because if it's a war party, we'll start shooting." Ayanna straightened to her full, intimidating height, her nearly 7 feet of trained muscle casting a long shadow in the morning light. "My father comes as promised. He will speak Apache law and federal law both." The riders materialized from the dust, not the massive war party Kane had feared, but Chief Nalnish with a carefully chosen group of 5 elders, their faces painted for formal ceremony. They approached slowly, deliberately, every movement calculated to show respect for both Apache tradition and federal authority. Chief Nalnish dismounted with the dignity of a man accustomed to command. He was older than Ezekiel had expected, maybe 50 winters, but his body carried the lean strength of a survivor. Most striking were his eyes, intelligent, calculating, and completely unintimidated by the armed marshals surrounding him. "Marshal Kane," the chief said in perfect English, somehow knowing the lawman's name. "You hold my daughters as prisoners. This creates problem between our peoples." Kane stepped forward, his badge catching the morning sunlight. "Your daughters murdered settlers at the Morrison place. They're wanted for questioning under federal law. Morrison tried to force himself on my daughters," Chief Nalnish replied with dangerous calm. "They defended their honor. Apache law justifies their actions. Federal treaty recognizes Apache law in matters involving tribal members." The legal chess match had begun. Ezekiel watched as two experienced negotiators circled each other with words instead of weapons, each seeking advantage through law rather than force. "Even if that's true," Kane said, "harboring fugitives is a federal crime. This rancher broke the law helping them." Chief Nalnish turned his attention to Ezekiel, studying him with intense focus. "You are Ezekiel Marsh. 3 moons ago, you saved my youngest daughter from drowning in the creek." "Yes, sir," Ezekiel managed, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. "For this, Apache law says I owe you blood debt. Life for life," the chief's voice carried across the yard with absolute authority. "But you also saved 2 more of my daughters when they were dying. This makes debt very complicated." Ayanna stepped closer to Ezekiel, her massive frame both protective and supportive. "Chief," she said formally, "this man risked everything to help us. He is worthy of Apache respect." Chief Nalnish nodded slowly, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew something that made everyone go still. A necklace of carved bone and silver, the kind worn only by Apache family members of the highest rank. "3 lives saved creates obligation beyond simple blood debt," the chief announced, his words carrying the weight of tribal law. "Ezekiel Marsh, you have proven yourself worthy of adoption into Apache family. You become my son through deed and honor." Kane's rifle trembled in his hands. "You can't just declare American territory as Indian land. The federal government recognizes treaty rights," Chief Nalnish interrupted smoothly. "Treaty says Apache can adopt members, claim family lands. Your own law protects adopted Apache family members from persecution." The brilliance of the decision struck Ezekiel like lightning. In one move, the chief had solved every problem: protection for his daughters, legal immunity for Ezekiel, and a way to claim valuable ranch land under federal treaty law. "Ezekiel Marsh," Chief Nalnish continued, "do you accept adoption? Do you take my daughters as your sisters? My people as your people?" Looking at Ayanna and Itzel, 2 giant warriors who had trusted him with their lives, Ezekiel realized this was more than legal protection. It was transformation, belonging, and the chance to bridge 2 worlds that had only known war. "I accept," he said clearly. Chief Nalnish stepped forward and placed the necklace around Ezekiel's neck. The weight of it felt like chains and freedom combined. Kane holstered his weapon with obvious frustration, knowing he had been outmaneuvered completely. "This isn't over. There'll be federal investigations. Let them come," Chief Nalnish said with quiet confidence. "Apache law is clear. Federal treaty honors Apache law. My son and daughters are under tribal protection now." But as the chief prepared to leave with his elders, he turned back to Ezekiel with something that might have been amusement in his ancient eyes. "Son," he said quietly, "tomorrow I return with different decision. Tonight think carefully about what adoption truly means." The next day, Chief Nalnish returned with the decision that would change everything forever. Ezekiel stood in his yard, still wearing the adoption necklace that had made him Apache family, still uncertain what the chief's cryptic words about different decision had meant. Beside him, Ayanna towered in all her 7-foot glory, her massive frame casting shadows across the ground as she watched her father approach with a small group of elders. The months following his adoption had been a revelation. His failing ranch had transformed into a thriving trading post where Apache families came to exchange goods with white settlers under federal treaty protection. The giant sisters had proven invaluable. Itzel's imposing presence and sharp mind for business made negotiations smooth and profitable, while Ayanna's incredible strength helped with construction and heavy labor that would have taken Ezekiel weeks to complete alone. But success came with complications he hadn't anticipated. Every day spent working alongside Ayanna, watching her move with deadly grace despite her towering size, feeling the quiet intelligence behind her dark eyes, had made his feelings for her impossible to ignore. She was his sister by Apache law now, protected by rules that carried death sentences for violation. You struggle with adoption, Itzel had observed the day before, her own 6.5-foot frame making even ordinary conversations feel momentous. Apache law protects family, but some protections become prisons. Now, as Chief Nalnish dismounted with ceremonial dignity, Ezekiel wondered if the older man had somehow sensed the impossible situation he'd created. "My son," the chief began, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment, "you have honored adoption well. Apache people see your worth, your protection of those who needed shelter." He paused, studying Ezekiel's expression. "But I am old man, and old men sometimes solve one problem while creating another." Ezekiel felt his heart race as the chief's calculating gaze moved between him and Ayanna. "When I made you brother to my daughters," Chief Nalnish continued, "I solved problem of law, but I created problem of heart." He gestured to the giant woman standing beside Ezekiel. "Ayanna is warrior, trained to fight and lead, but she is also a woman who chooses her own path. Apache law respects such choices." Ayanna stepped forward, her imposing height making even her father look small by comparison. "Chief," she said formally, "I choose to speak." "Speak then, daughter." Her deep voice carried across the yard with absolute clarity. "Brother has shown honor beyond any white man I have known. His heart is true, his courage proven. But," she paused, meeting Ezekiel's eyes directly, "my heart sees him not as brother, but as man worthy of different bond." Chief Nalnish smiled, the same calculating expression that had terrified federal marshals. "Apache law has solution for this too. Brother who proves himself worthy can be released from family bond by chief's word, if other family agrees." He turned to Itzel. "Younger daughter, what say you?" Itzel's massive frame straightened to its full impressive height. "I release Ezekiel Marsh from brotherhood. He has earned right to choose his own path." She grinned, her smile transforming her imposing features. "And sister has waited long enough for happiness." "Then I speak final decision," Chief Nalnish announced, his voice echoing with authority. "I release Ezekiel Marsh from adoption. He is no longer my son by law." The words hung in the air like smoke. "But if he chooses, he can become my son by marriage, if my giant daughter agrees to have him." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the frontier had ever seen. Apache traditions blended with territorial law, creating a marriage that was legal in both worlds. Federal authorities, still smarting from their earlier legal defeat, could only watch as Ezekiel married into one of the most powerful Apache families in the territory. Itzel served as witness, her laughter ringing across the valley as she watched her sister's joy. Standing nearly 7 feet tall in traditional wedding dress, Ayanna was a sight that took every witness's breath away. A giant among women, beautiful and deadly, choosing love over duty. The trading post prospered beyond all expectations. The unusual sight of 2 giant Apache sisters working alongside their new brother-in-law became legend across the territory. Settlers came from hundreds of miles away, just to see the women who stood taller than most men and could outwork any 3 ordinary people. Federal investigations ceased entirely when Washington realized the political value of a peaceful trading relationship. The small ranch that had once meant failure became the foundation of a new kind of frontier community, where size meant respect and strength served peace. Chief Nalnish's truly shocking decision had been revealed, not just adopting a white settler, but orchestrating an intricate legal chess game that freed his daughter to marry for love while maintaining tribal honor and federal protection. 6 months later, as Ezekiel watched his towering wife direct construction of their expanded home, he realized that some of life's greatest blessings come disguised as impossible complications. The giant Apache sisters had brought him not just love and prosperity, but a place in a world larger than any he had imagined possible. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us. "No man is strong enough for me," said the giant Apache woman until she met the cowboy. 3 men lay in the dust, groaning. A 4th stood frozen, watching the woman who'd put them there without breaking a sweat. She was taller than any of them, broader in the shoulders, and she hadn't even bothered to pick up a weapon. Royce Barrett watched from the ridge above, his hand resting on his horse's neck to keep the animal quiet. The woman moved like water through stone, fluid, inevitable, unstoppable. But it wasn't her strength that held his attention. It was the way she held back, the precision in every movement, as if she was solving a problem rather than winning a fight. She wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with pieces of frontier wear, and around her neck hung something that made his chest tighten. An amulet he recognized, though he couldn't understand how she'd come to possess it. When she finally looked up toward the ridge, her eyes found his across the distance, and for a moment neither moved. Then she smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was a challenge. The men scrambled away, leaving their supplies scattered across the ground. Nahimana didn't chase them. She never did. Fear worked better than violence, and these men would tell others what they'd seen. How the Apache woman guarded the canyon passage. How no man could match her. How trying meant humiliation or worse. She'd built her reputation deliberately, turning herself into a living barrier between her people and the endless stream of settlers who thought Apache land was theirs for the taking. She bent to gather the abandoned supplies when movement on the ridge caught her attention. A rider watching. She'd known he was there for the past 10 minutes, had felt his eyes on her like heat on skin. Most men looked away when she met their gaze. This one didn't. He sat easy in the saddle, dark hair catching the light, and something about his stillness irritated her more than the other's aggression had. Royce urged his horse down the slope, keeping his hands visible, his movements slow. He'd learned that from his mother, how to approach without threatening, how to show respect without showing weakness. The woman below didn't reach for a weapon, but her body shifted into something between stance and readiness. He could see her more clearly now. She stood at least 6 inches taller than him, with arms that showed the kind of strength that came from necessity, not vanity. Scars marked her forearms in patterns he recognized as ceremonial, but others looked like they'd been earned in ways that had nothing to do with ritual. Passage is closed, she called up in English that carried only the slightest accent. Turn back. Can't do that. He stopped his horse 20 feet away, far enough to be respectful, close enough to be heard without shouting. Got medicine needed in the settlement past the canyon. Children are sick. Not my concern. Figured you'd say that. He dismounted slowly, keeping his eyes on hers. But I'm asking anyway. Not looking for trouble. Trouble found you when you came here. She moved closer, and he noticed she walked with the balls of her feet first, silent despite her size. Every man who crosses this land thinks he has a good reason. You all think your reasons matter more than our sacred ground. Maybe I do. Maybe they're dying, and your sacred ground is the only path that gets medicine there in time. He saw her jaw tighten. I'm not asking you to abandon what you protect. I'm asking you to let mercy pass through. She was close now. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Close enough to smell sage and smoke on her clothes. She studied him with the intensity of someone reading a language most people couldn't see. His posture, his breathing, the way his hand hung near his belt but not on the gun there, the calluses on his palms that told stories about how he'd lived. You're different from the others, she said finally, and it didn't sound like a compliment. That makes you more dangerous. Or less. We'll see. She turned her back on him deliberately, an insult or a test. You can try to pass, but first, you prove you're strong enough. Royce looked at her broad shoulders, the easy way she carried herself, remembered the men in the dust. Not interested in fighting you. That made her stop. She turned back slowly, surprise crossing her features before suspicion replaced it. Every man wants to prove himself against me. I'm not every man. Then what are you? He met her eyes steadily. Someone who knows there's more than one kind of strength. The words hung between them, charged with something neither quite understood yet. Nahimana felt frustration rise in her chest. He was supposed to challenge her, to give her a reason to send him away like the others. His refusal to follow the script threw her off balance in a way physical combat never did. You don't get to pass because you have a clever tongue, she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Didn't think I would. He gestured to the scattered supplies. But while we're talking, mind if I look at what those men left behind? Might be something useful. She watched him crouch near the abandoned packs, sorting through them with quick, efficient hands. He moved like someone who'd lived rough, who knew the value of every item. When he pulled out a water skin and offered it to her first before drinking himself, something in her chest twisted uncomfortably. This was going to be more complicated than she'd thought, and she had no idea that before the sun set twice more, Everything she believed about strength, about men, about herself, would be stripped down to something raw and real and terrifying. Nahimana watched him sort through the supplies with hands that knew what they were doing. Most men fumbled with packs like they'd never traveled rough a day in their lives. This one moved with the efficiency of someone who'd lived with less than enough for long enough to make it a skill. "Where did you learn Apache manners?" she asked suddenly, the question sharper than she'd intended. Royce looked up, squinting against the sun behind her. "My mother. She lived with the Chiricahua for 3 years before I was born. Taught me that respect isn't the same as submission." The answer surprised her. She'd expected evasion or lies. Men usually gave her one or the other. "Your mother was captured? Taken in?" He stood, dusting off his hands. "She was sick, dying probably. They found her on the edge of their territory and chose mercy over suspicion. She never forgot that." Nahimana felt the ground shift slightly under her assumptions about him. She looked more closely at the amulet around her own neck. A simple leather cord with a small turquoise stone wrapped in silver wire. She'd found it near the river 3 seasons ago, had worn it because something about it felt right, felt protective. "That stone," Royce said quietly, his eyes fixed on her throat. "Where did you get it?" "Found it." "Why?" Her hand moved to cover it instinctively. "My mother made one like it. Gave it to someone who saved her life during a fever. A healer." His voice had gone distant. "She died 2 winters ago. I've been looking for that healer ever since to thank them, to tell them she never stopped being grateful." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Nahimana's grandmother had been the tribe's healer. Had been, until she passed during the same winter Royce mentioned. The timing made her skin prickle with awareness, not of anything mystical, but of the way small moments in different lives could intersect without anyone knowing, until much later. "The healer who wore that amulet is gone," Nahimana said finally. "She was my grandmother." Royce's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for her to name them all. Grief, recognition, something that looked almost like relief. "Then she raised you. She taught me strength, taught me that we protect what matters, no matter the cost. She taught my mother that too." He took a step closer, and Nahimana noticed he didn't ask permission, didn't treat her space like it needed to be negotiated. Said the strongest people are the ones who know when to fight and when to heal. Those men earlier didn't need healing. They needed a lesson, and you gave them one. His eyes held hers. "But you didn't break any bones, didn't do permanent damage. You could have." She hated that he'd noticed, hated that he saw past the performance she'd perfected over years. "What's your point?" "My point is you're already stronger than you need to prove, which makes me think you're proving something to yourself, not to them." The words hit like a palm strike to the chest. Unexpected, accurate, infuriating. Nahimana felt anger rise hot in her throat. "You know nothing about me. I know your grandmother raised you to be more than just a fighter." He gestured to the canyon behind her. "I know she'd want you to let medicine through to save children, because that's who she was. Don't you dare use her memory to manipulate me." Not manipulation. Truth. He didn't back down from her anger. Didn't flinch when she moved into his space, using her height to intimidate. "You can send me back. You can make me find another route that'll take 3 more days. But you'll know what choice you made. And you'll know why." They stood close enough now that she could see a small scar above his left eyebrow, could count the different shades of brown in his eyes. His breath was steady despite her proximity, despite the implied threat of her size. Most men would have stepped back by now. He stayed exactly where he was, neither advancing nor retreating, just present in a way that made her heart beat faster, for reasons that had nothing to do with combat readiness. "One night," she said through her teeth. "You camp here tonight. Tomorrow I decide if you pass. Fair enough. And you don't touch anything. Don't wander. Don't test my patience." Understood. She should have walked away then. Should have put distance between them. Should have used the night to reinforce all the reasons why letting him through was weakness. Instead, she found herself still standing there, caught in the gravity of his steady gaze, in the way he treated her anger like weather to acknowledge rather than a storm to flee from. "Why do you really need to pass through?" she asked, her voice lower now, genuinely curious. "The truth this time. I told you the truth. Children sick with fever. Settlement 5 days northwest if I go around, 2 days if I go through." He paused, and something painful crossed his face. "I watched my sister die of fever when I was 12. Watched my mother hold her and pray and beg while she burned up from the inside. If I can stop that from happening to someone else, I will. Every time, no matter what stands in my way. Nahimana heard the bedrock certainty in his words. The kind of conviction that came from old wounds that never quite healed. She recognized it because she carried the same kind. Losses that shaped you, that made you draw lines in the dust and dare the world to cross them. "Make your camp by the rocks," she said abruptly, turning away before he could see whatever expression had taken over her face. "And stay visible. I'll be watching." As she walked toward the canyon's edge, she could feel his eyes on her back. Not threatening, not predatory, just aware, the way you were aware of a storm approaching or fire crackling nearby. Something powerful that demanded attention. She didn't know yet that watching him would be the beginning of the end of every wall she'd built. Didn't know that by morning, she'd have to choose between the person she'd made herself into and the person her grandmother had hoped she'd become. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the armor of muscle and reputation, something whispered that this cowboy with sad eyes and steady hands was about to change everything. The scream cut through the evening air like a blade through cloth. Royce was on his feet before conscious thought, hand already reaching for his rifle. Nahimana materialized from the shadows near the canyon wall, running toward the sound with the kind of speed that shouldn't be possible for someone her size. He followed without hesitation, his horse forgotten, medicine packs left behind in his instinct to reach whoever had made that sound. They found the source 50 yards into the canyon. 2 members of Nahimana's tribe, a young man and an older woman, trapped beneath a partial rock slide. The woman's leg twisted at an angle that made Royce's stomach clench. The young man, pinned from the waist down, was conscious, but pale with shock. "Kohana," Nahimana breathed, dropping to her knees beside the young man. Her hands moved over the rocks with frantic precision, testing weight and stability. "Don't move. Don't try to shift. Hurts," he gasped. "Grandmother, check grandmother." Royce was already there, crouching beside the older woman. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. The leg was bad, clearly broken. But what worried him more was the gray tinge to her lips, the way her pupils were different sizes. She hit her head. "We need to move these rocks now. But carefully. Wrong move could bring down more." Nahimana looked at him across the space between the trapped victims. And in that moment, all pretense of antagonism evaporated. There was only the crisis, only the need, only 2 people who knew how to act when others would freeze. "You know medicine?" she demanded. "Field medicine. Enough. Then tell me how to move these rocks without killing them." He assessed the situation with the kind of quick calculation that came from years of fixing what could be fixed and accepting what couldn't. The big one on the woman. "We lift together on my count. You're stronger. You take the weight. I'll pull her clear. The boy is more complicated. Those rocks are supporting each other. We'll need to shore up the gaps before we remove them." "Shore up with what?" Royce looked around, thinking fast. "Wood from my saddle pack, canvas, anything that can distribute the weight differently." He met her eyes. "But we have to move her first. That head injury won't wait." Nahimana positioned herself at the heaviest boulder, and Royce noticed for the first time that her hands were shaking, barely, almost imperceptibly, but shaking nonetheless. This wasn't just tribe. This was family. "On 3, he said, gripping the woman's shoulders gently. 1, 2, 3. Nahimana lifted, the muscles in her arms and back bunched with effort, veins standing out against her skin, and the boulder shifted with a grinding sound that made them both freeze. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Royce pulled, dragging the unconscious woman free just as Nahimana's strength gave out, and the boulder crashed back down with force that would have crushed anything beneath it. They both sat hard in the dust, breathing heavy. The woman lay between them, alive but damaged in ways that would take time to measure. "Kohana," Nahimana said, already moving toward her trapped cousin. "Hold on. We're coming." "No." Royce caught her arm, felt the coiled strength there, the barely controlled panic. "We do this wrong. We kill him. We need the supplies from my pack. We need to think." "We don't have time to think. We have exactly enough time to do this right." He stood, pulling her up with him, surprised when she let him. "He's stable for now. Conscious, talking. That injury to his legs. We rush it, we cause bleeding, we can't stop. You know I'm right." She did know. He could see it in her face, in the way her jaw worked as she fought between instinct and intelligence. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and angry. Get your supplies. Fast. They worked in the gathering darkness, and Royce was struck by how easily they moved around each other, how she anticipated what he needed before he asked, how he understood where she should position herself for maximum leverage. It was like a dance they'd practiced for years instead of improvised in minutes. When they finally freed Kohana, his legs were crushed badly enough that Royce knew the recovery would be long and uncertain. But he was alive, and that was something. Nahimana carried her cousin with a gentleness that contradicted everything about her fierce reputation. Royce supported the grandmother, moving slowly through the canyon toward the tribal camp he hadn't known was so close. As they walked, he became aware of eyes in the darkness, other tribe members, watching, judging, measuring this outsider who moved among them. "They'll want you gone," Nahimana said quietly. "Once everyone is stable, they'll demand I send you away. Will you?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried a weight of realization that changed the texture of the air between them. "I don't know anymore. You saved my family tonight. That creates a debt. I didn't do it for debt." "I know." She adjusted Kohana's weight across her shoulders. "That's what makes it complicated." They reached the camp, a cluster of traditional structures mixed with more permanent buildings, all tucked into a protected fold of the canyon. People emerged from the shadows, concerned faces turning to shock when they saw Royce. An older man stepped forward, his face carved with age and authority. "Nahimana, what is this?" "This is the man who helped save Kohana and grandmother. This is—" She hesitated, and Royce realized she'd never asked his name. "This is someone whose mother was saved by grandmother years ago." The old man's eyes moved from Nahimana to Royce and back again. "We don't allow outsiders here." "He's already here," Nahimana said, her voice taking on an edge Royce recognized as defensive. "And grandmother needs medical attention he knows how to give. We can discuss rules after we discuss survival." Royce watched the silent battle of wills between Nahimana and the elder, watched the way her tribe members shifted uneasily, caught between gratitude and distrust. He understood suddenly that his presence here wasn't just breaking Nahimana's personal rules about men and strength. It was breaking something much bigger, the boundary she'd spent years reinforcing between her people and the outside world that kept trying to destroy them. "One night," the elder said finally, "you tend the wounded, then you leave before dawn, and you never speak of this place to anyone." "Agreed," Royce said before Nahimana could complicate things. But as they carried the injured into a structure lit with low firelight, as he worked beside Nahimana through the night cleaning wounds and setting bones and mixing medicines from his pack with herbs she provided, he knew that one night wouldn't be enough, not nearly enough to understand the woman beside him, whose hands could break bones or bind them with equal skill, not enough to figure out why being near her made his chest feel too tight and too open at the same time, and definitely not enough to prepare for what the morning would demand of both of them. Dawn broke cold and unforgiving across the canyon rim. Royce hadn't slept. He'd spent the night monitoring Kohana's breathing, checking the grandmother's pupils every hour, adjusting bandages and mixing fresh poultices from the herbs Nahimana brought him. She hadn't slept either. He'd watched her move between family members, her face carefully blank, but her hands gentle in ways that contradicted everything about her public persona. Now, as pale light filtered through the structure's entrance, he heard voices outside, angry voices. "He leaves now, before full sunrise." That was the elder from last night, the one whose authority clearly held weight here. "Grandmother is still unconscious. Kohana has fever." Nahimana's voice controlled but strained. "They need continued care. Then you provide it. You've learned enough from watching him work. I've learned field medicine isn't the same as healing knowledge. I can set bones. I can't predict if infection will set in or if grandmother's head injury will—" "Enough!" The elder's voice cut through her protest. "This man sees our camp, our numbers, our vulnerabilities. Every moment he stays is a risk we cannot afford." Royce moved to the entrance quietly. The gathered tribe members, maybe 20 in total, stood in a loose semicircle. Nahimana faced them alone, her back straight, her shoulders squared. When she saw him emerge, something flickered across her face. Relief? Frustration? He couldn't tell. "I'll leave," Royce said clearly. "I gave my word. One night. Medical help. Then gone before dawn. I keep my word." The elder nodded with grim satisfaction. "Gather your things." "But—" Nahimana started. "No." Royce met her eyes, saw the conflict there. "He's right. I've already seen too much. Stayed too long. You can handle the rest. The grandmother needs to stay still. Elevated head. Check her eyes every few hours. Kohana needs the leg rewrapped twice daily. The mixture I showed you applied fresh each time. If fever spikes, use the willow bark tea, not too strong or it'll upset his stomach. He was giving her instructions, but what he was really doing was giving her an exit from the impossible choice she'd been about to make. He could see her recognize it, see the gratitude and resentment war across her features. I'll walk you to the canyon edge, she said stiffly. They gathered his supplies in tense silence, the tribe watching every movement. When Nahimana lifted his heavy medicine packs with ease, an older woman made a small sound of approval. Royce noticed how Nahimana's jaw tightened at that. Even now, even here among her own people, she felt the need to prove her strength. They walked without speaking until the camp disappeared behind canyon curves. Finally, alone except for the echoes of their footsteps, Nahimana stopped. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Make it easy for me. Let me choose duty over. She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. Over what? Royce asked quietly. She turned to face him, and the morning light caught the exhaustion in her face, the strain of holding herself together through a night of fear for her family. Over wanting you to stay. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Royce felt something in his chest crack open, felt the careful distance he'd been maintaining crumble like dried clay. I don't want to leave, he said, the truth surprising him with its intensity. But those children in the settlement need you more than we do. I know. She looked away, toward the canyon rim where his horse waited. It's just, last night working with you it felt like, she struggled for words, like I wasn't alone, like someone finally understood what it costs to be strong all the time. Royce moved closer, close enough to see the fine lines of fatigue around her eyes, close enough to smell sage and smoke and something uniquely her. You're not alone. You've never been alone. You have your tribe, your family, who see me as a wall, a barrier, a weapon. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. You saw me as a person. His hand lifted almost without conscious thought, hovering near her face, not quite touching. You are a person, a remarkable one, strong enough to be gentle when it matters, fierce enough to protect what you love, smart enough to know the difference. Her eyes met his, and he saw something vulnerable there, something she'd probably never let anyone see before. My grandmother used to say that real strength is knowing when to open your hand and when to make a fist. She was right. I've been making fists for so long. I forgot how to open my hand. She took a shaky breath. Until last night. Until I watched you with Kohana, and saw that gentleness isn't weakness. Nahimana, go. She stepped back, and he watched the walls rebuild in real time across her face. Go save those children. That's what matters. But Royce didn't move. He stood there, caught in the gravity of her presence, in the impossible choice between two kinds of duty, the one to strangers who needed him, and the one to this woman who'd just shown him a piece of her soul. If I go now, I won't make it in time, he said slowly, thinking out loud. I lost a night. The direct route through here was supposed to save me 2 days. Going around now means at least 4 more days of travel. Nahimana's expression shifted. You're saying the children might not make it. The fever I described, the symptoms, they have maybe 5 or 6 days before. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. She looked toward the canyon passage, the route she'd been guarding for months, the sacred ground she'd sworn to protect. Then she looked at him, and he saw her make a decision that would change everything. Then I'm coming with you. What? Through the canyon. I'll guide you through the fastest route. Paths only tribe members know. We can cut a full day off the journey. Her voice gained strength as she spoke. But I come with you. I see where you're going. I verify these sick children exist, and I make sure you keep your word about never revealing this place. Your tribe won't allow. My tribe doesn't control me. Fire lit her eyes. I'm not some possession they get to dictate terms to. If I choose to ensure an outsider honors his agreement by accompanying him, that's my choice to make. Royce studied her face, looking for hidden motives, finding only fierce determination and something else. Maybe hope, maybe curiosity, maybe the same pull he felt toward her. It'll be dangerous. Not just the travel. The settlement might not welcome you. I'm not asking for welcome. I'm asking if you trust me enough to let me come. The question cut deeper than geography or logistics. She was asking if he saw her as threat or ally, as weapon or partner, as the wall her tribe needed or the person she'd shown him she could be. "I trust you," he said, and meant it completely. She nodded once, decisive. "Then we leave within the hour. I need to tell the elder. Gather supplies. Make sure someone else knows how to care for Kohana and grandmother." As she turned to head back to camp, Royce caught her wrist gently. She stopped, looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how fast I make you travel." But there was a smile in her voice. Small and uncertain, and absolutely devastating. And Royce realized with sudden terrifying clarity that this journey was going to test more than their endurance. It was going to test every assumption they'd made about strength, trust, and what it meant to let someone pass the walls you'd built to survive. The argument with the elder had been brutal and brief. Nahimana stood in the center of camp, her few belongings already packed, facing down the man who'd helped raise her after her grandmother had taken on the role. His weathered face was tight with anger, and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "You would abandon your duty for a stranger?" he demanded. "I would honor my grandmother's memory by ensuring medicine reaches children who need it, just as she would have done." Nahimana's voice remained steady. "And I would protect our location by making certain this man keeps his word. You protect our location by keeping outsiders away, not by traveling with them. He already knows where we are. The only thing I can control now is what he does with that knowledge." She adjusted the pack on her shoulder. "I'll return in 6 days. Maybe 7. Kohana and grandmother will be stable by then. And if you don't return?" The question hung heavy. Nahimana met the elder's eyes without flinching. "Then you'll know I died keeping our people safe." "Isn't that what you raised me to do?" She walked away before he could respond, before the guilt could sink hooks deep enough to hold her. Royce waited beyond the camp perimeter with both horses, his expression neutral, but his eyes seeing too much as always. "Rough?" he asked as she approached. "I'll survive." They rode in silence through the canyon, Nahimana leading on a path that required single-file navigation through spaces so narrow Royce had to turn sideways in the saddle. The rock walls rose on either side like the ribs of some ancient giant, casting them in perpetual shadow. She moved with absolute confidence through the maze, never hesitating at the forks and splits that would have lost him within minutes. After 2 hours, the canyon opened into a valley Royce had never known existed, a hidden stretch of grassland fed by an underground spring, lush and green in defiance of the harsh desert beyond. "We'll water the horses here," Nahimana said, dismounting with fluid ease. "Then we head northeast through the ridge passage. That's the route that saves us a day." Royce slid from his saddle, his legs stiff from the tense navigation. He watched Nahimana lead the horses to the spring, noticed how she checked each animal's legs and hooves with practiced care before letting them drink. Everything she did carried that same quality, strength tempered by attention, power softened by knowledge. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "Observing. Is there a difference?" Now she did turn, eyebrow raised. "Usually no. With you maybe." He moved closer, crouching to splash water on his face. The cold shocked his skin awake. "I'm trying to figure out how someone so strong ended up so isolated." Her face closed immediately. "I'm not isolated. I have my tribe. You have people you protect. That's not the same as having people who know you." He straightened, water dripping from his jaw. "Last night you said I saw you as a person. That means most people don't, including your own tribe. They see what they need to see. What about what you need?" The question clearly caught her off guard. She stared at him for a long moment, something working behind her eyes. "What I need doesn't matter. My tribe needs a defender. That's what I am. That's what you do. It's not what you are. You don't know what I am. Then tell me." Royce took a step closer, drawn by the same pull that had been growing since he'd first seen her. "We've got a 2-day ride ahead of us. Plenty of time for you to explain why being strong means being alone." Nahimana's hands curled into fists at her sides, that automatic response to discomfort, that instinct to fight rather than feel. But then, slowly, deliberately, she opened them. Royce watched the gesture, recognized it as the enormous act of courage it was. "When I was 16, she said quietly, "I was smaller than the boys my age, weaker. They never let me forget it. So I trained. I pushed myself until my muscles burned and my hands bled and I could outlast any of them. I got strong because I had to, not because I wanted to. And then I became the strongest, and suddenly everyone wanted me to use that strength for them. Protect them, fight for them, be their wall against everything that scared them. Her voice held old bitterness. No one asked if I was tired, if I wanted something different. They just needed me to be strong, so that's what I became. That's what you became for them, Royce corrected gently. But who are you when no one's watching? When you don't have to be anyone's wall? She looked away, toward the ridgeline where their path continued. I don't know anymore. Maybe I never knew. The admission cost her. Royce could see it in the tension of her shoulders, the way she held herself as if expecting punishment for weakness. He wanted to tell her that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that letting walls down took more strength than keeping them up, but he'd learned that some truths people had to discover for themselves. Instead, he said, then maybe this journey is a chance to find out. She met his eyes again, and something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but opening, like a door unlocking after years of being barred shut. Is that what you did? After your mother died, after your sister? Did you find out who you were when you stopped being the person grief made you? The question hit with surprising accuracy. Royce felt his own walls rattle, felt the careful distance he maintained threatened by her perception. I'm still figuring that out. At least you're honest about it. Seems like the least I can do when you're being honest with me. They stood there in the hidden valley, horses drinking peacefully behind them, the spring bubbling its endless song into stone. The moment stretched, charged with possibility and risk in equal measure. We should keep moving, Nahimana said finally. But she didn't move. We should, Royce agreed, also not moving. Royce. His name in her mouth sounded different than when others said it. Rougher, more real. Yeah? If this goes badly, if the settlement rejects us, if my tribe refuses to take me back, if those children... She stopped, started again. I need you to know that I chose this. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Why? She held his gaze steadily. Because for the first time in years someone looked at me and didn't see a weapon. You saw a person who was tired of fighting alone. And I wanted to find out what happens if I stop fighting for just a little while. Royce felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been locked tight for the 2 years since he'd buried his mother suddenly coming loose. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Not for these next few days, anyway. Is that a promise? That's a fact. The smile she gave him was small and uncertain, but it transformed her face in ways that made his breath catch. He'd thought her beautiful in her strength, intimidating in her power. But this vulnerability wrapped in courage, this woman choosing to trust despite every reason not to, this was something beyond beauty. This was connection. Come on, she said, the moment breaking as she moved toward the horses. If we're going to save those children, we need to reach the ridge passage before nightfall. The path gets dangerous after dark. As they mounted up and rode toward the valley's far edge, Royce realized he'd stopped thinking about the journey as a mission and started thinking about it as something else entirely. A chance, an opening, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone who understood what it meant to carry weight too heavy to name, and who might be willing to share that burden for a while. Someone who might let him share hers in return. The ridge passage loomed ahead, dark and narrow and uncertain, but for the first time since his mother's death, Royce felt something besides grief and purpose pushing him forward. He felt hope. The ridge passage was worse than Royce had imagined, not dangerous in the way of rock slides or predators, but dangerous in the way of exhaustion. Narrow paths that required constant attention, steep climbs that tested the horse's endurance, and thin air that made every breath feel insufficient. They'd been climbing for 6 hours when Nahimana's horse stumbled. The animal caught itself, but the momentary loss of footing on the rocky path sent stones cascading down the slope. Nahimana dismounted immediately, running her hands down the horse's front leg with focused intensity. Strained, she said, her jaw tight. Not serious yet, but it will be if we push her further today. Royce looked at the sun's position, calculating time and distance. We're halfway through the passage. Can't camp here. No water, no shelter, too exposed. I know. She straightened, frustration clear in every line of her body. But I won't cripple her to meet a deadline. I wasn't suggesting we should. He dismounted, assessing their options. We double up on my horse for the rest of the passage. Lead yours unburdened. It'll be slower. Add maybe 3 hours. but we'll make the far side by dark. Nahimana looked at his horse, then at him, and Royce saw her working through the logistics and the implications. 2 people, 1 horse, hours of riding with bodies pressed together, the practical necessity warring with the awareness that had been building between them since the valley. Unless you have a better idea, he added quietly. I don't. She gathered her horse's reins, redistributing packs to lighten the animal's load. Your horse strong enough to carry us both? He's carried heavier through worse. Royce secured the medicine packs carefully. Question is whether you're comfortable with it. She met his eyes directly. I've done harder things than share a saddle. But when she mounted behind him minutes later, arms wrapping around his waist for balance, Royce felt her tension through every point of contact. She held herself carefully, trying to minimize touch, trying to maintain some boundary between them. It lasted maybe 10 minutes before the terrain forced her closer, forced her to trust his balance, forced her body against his back as they navigated narrow turns and steep inclines. You're going to break a rib holding yourself that stiff, Royce said over his shoulder. I'm fine. You're rigid as steel. If the horse shifts suddenly, you'll throw us both. He felt her start to argue, cut it off. Nahimana, I'm not going to read anything into this that isn't there. You can relax. Slowly, incrementally, he felt her ease. Her arms settled more naturally around him. Her body curved against his back, finding the rhythm of the horse's movement rather than fighting it. And despite his words about not reading anything into it, Royce was acutely aware of every breath she took, every small adjustment, the warmth of her spreading through his shirt. Can I ask you something? Her voice came close to his ear, sending awareness down his spine. Sure. Why haven't you settled somewhere? Built something permanent? You move like a man who's been running for a long time. The observation cut close. Maybe I have been. From what? He was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horse around a particularly narrow section before answering. From standing still long enough to feel everything I lost. Moving had purpose. Bring supplies here, medicine there, help where it's needed. Standing still just meant remembering. And now? Now I'm starting to think maybe some things are worth standing still for. He felt her breath catch, felt her arms tighten just slightly around him. Royce, you asked, he said, keeping his tone light despite the weight of what he wasn't saying directly. Your turn. Why did you really come with me? The truth this time, not the excuse about making sure I keep my word. She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the wind. Because I was tired of being strong alone. Because when you looked at me, I felt seen instead of used. Because for the first time in years, I wanted something for myself instead of just doing what others needed. And what do you want? I don't know yet. Her forehead rested briefly against his shoulder blade, a gesture of trust so simple and profound it made his chest ache. But I think I want to find out. They rode in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came from understanding, from 2 people who'd spent so long carrying weight alone that sharing it felt like relief. The passage opened onto a downward slope just as the sun began its descent. A valley spread below them, not hidden and lush like the morning's oasis, but harsh and real, with a creek cutting through scrub grass and scattered trees providing sparse shade. We camp there, Nahimana said, pointing to a cluster of rocks near the water, protected from wind, close to water, good visibility. They made camp efficiently, years of solo travel making them both competent at the necessary tasks, but there was new awareness in how they moved around each other. Nahimana handing him things before he asked, Royce anticipating where she'd need space, both of them careful not to let the earlier intimacy of shared riding translate into assumption. As darkness fell and they sat on opposite sides of the fire, Nahimana broke the silence. Tomorrow we reach the settlement, if we leave at dawn, by afternoon. And then? The question held more weight than its words. Royce met her eyes across the flames. Then we see if we got here in time. We see if the medicine works. We see if they accept help from an Apache woman. And if they don't, then they're fools, and we help anyway. She smiled at that, small and tired but genuine. You make it sound simple. It is simple. What's right isn't always what's easy, but it's always simple. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. My mother used to say that complexity is just an excuse for not doing what you know you should. Your mother was wise. She was, and she'd have liked you. Nahimana's eyebrows rose. Why? Because you're exactly the kind of strong she believed in. The kind that knows when to fight and when to heal. He looked up from the fire, caught her gaze and held it. The kind that takes more courage than most people understand. She stared at him for a long moment, something working in her expression that he couldn't quite read. Then she stood abruptly, moving to her bedroll. We should sleep. Long day tomorrow. But as Royce lay down on his own side of the fire, listening to the creak and the night sounds, he heard her voice drift across the darkness. Thank you. For what? For making me feel like maybe I'm more than just what I can fight. He wanted to tell her she was so much more, wanted to list every way she'd surprised and impressed and moved him over the past 2 days. Instead, he said simply, "You don't have to thank me for seeing what's already there." Silence settled over the camp, but it was charged with possibility, with the sense that whatever they found in the settlement tomorrow, whatever happened after this journey ended, something between them had shifted into territory neither could map yet. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Something that felt even more dangerously close to the kind of connection that changed everything. The settlement wasn't what Nahimana expected. She'd pictured something rough and temporary, canvas structures and desperate faces. Instead, they rode into a collection of permanent buildings arranged around a central square. Small, isolated, but established. People moved between structures with the efficiency of routine until they spotted the riders. Then everything stopped. Royce felt Nahimana stiffen behind him on the horse. "Easy," he murmured. "Let me talk first." A man emerged from the largest building, his face weathered and suspicious. Behind him, others gathered, maybe 30 people total, watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to hostility. Nahimana's Apache clothing made her impossible to mistake for anything else. "Royce Barrett," the man said, recognition clearing some of the suspicion. "Wasn't sure you'd make it." "Had help." Royce dismounted, turned to help Nahimana down, though she clearly didn't need it. "This is Nahimana. She guided me through passages that saved us 2 days. Without her, I wouldn't have gotten here in time." The man's eyes moved from Royce to Nahimana and back again. "Apache." "Yes," Nahimana said clearly, meeting his stare without flinching. "Apache. And if your children are sick with the fever Royce described, they don't care who brings the medicine that saves them." A woman pushed through the crowd, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "My daughter is burning up. My son stopped eating yesterday. I don't care if help comes from an Apache or the devil himself. I just want my children to live." The tension shifted. The man who'd first spoken, clearly some kind of leader, looked between the desperate mother and Nahimana's unwavering stance. "The medicine is what we need, but we don't need trouble." "Then don't create it," Royce said quietly, an edge entering his voice. "We're here to help. That's all. Show us the sick." They were led to a building that had been converted into a makeshift infirmary. 6 children lay on beds, ranging from maybe 4 years old to early teens. The smell hit Nahimana immediately. Fever sweat, sickness, fear. She'd smelled it before in her own camp, recognized the particular quality of illness that could turn deadly without intervention. Royce moved among the children quickly, checking pulses and skin temperature, looking at eyes and listening to breathing. Nahimana watched him work, saw the practiced competence, the gentle way he spoke to scared children and exhausted parents. "It's the fever, I thought," he said finally, looking at Nahimana. "We need to prepare the medicine, get it into them before nightfall. They're further along than I hoped. Tell me what you need." They worked side by side. Royce, mixing his, brought medicines with boiled water. Nahimana holding children still when they thrashed, helping reluctant parents understand dosages and timing. She felt eyes on her constantly. The settlement people watching this Apache woman touch their children, help their families, work alongside Royce with an ease that spoke of practice. One mother, the desperate woman from earlier, approached Nahimana while Royce was across the room. "Why are you helping us?" Nahimana looked up from the child she was cooling with damp cloths. "Because they need help. Does there need to be another reason? Your people and our people. We're not exactly friends." "No," Nahimana agreed. "We're not. But your children aren't your people or my people. They're just children. And I've watched children burn with fever before. I know what it costs." She resumed the cooling process, her large hands surprisingly gentle. "I know what it costs to watch someone die when you couldn't save them." The mother's expression softened slightly. "You've lost someone. Everyone has lost someone. Nahimana's voice remained steady, but something in it made the woman reach out, just briefly touching her arm in wordless understanding. As the sun set, Royce pulled Nahimana aside. There's a problem. The medicine isn't working? The medicine will work, but it takes time. They need monitoring through the night. Temperatures checked, doses adjusted, fluids maintained. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I can handle 3, maybe 4 children, but 6, with their conditions this advanced, I need help. Skilled help. I can help. I know you can. But, he gestured toward the settlement people watching them with continued wariness. They're accepting your presence because I vouched for you. Actually trusting you with their children's lives through the night is different. Nahimana felt old anger rise, the familiar frustration of being judged for who she was rather than what she could do. But then she remembered what Royce had told her about strength. Real strength wasn't forcing people to accept her. Real strength was proving her worth through action, not intimidation. Then I'll prove I can be trusted, she said simply. She turned back to the infirmary, approached the settlement leader who'd challenged them initially. Your people don't trust me. I understand why. But those children need help through the night that one man can't provide alone. So here's what I propose. You, or anyone you choose, stays in this room with us. Watch everything I do. Question every action. The moment you think I'm a threat to these children, you stop me. But let me help save them. The man studied her for a long moment. Why? Why do you care about our children? Because caring about children shouldn't require a reason beyond them being children. She met his eyes steadily. Because your fear of me doesn't change what's right. And because if I were in your position, I'd want someone strong enough to help regardless of where they came from. Strong enough. The man's mouth quirked slightly. You're certainly that. Strength isn't just about fighting. My grandmother taught me that. Nahimana gestured to the sick children. Let me show you what real strength looks like. The man looked at Royce, who nodded. Finally, he sighed. I'll stay. I'll watch. But the first sign of won't come, Nahimana interrupted. I give you my word. Through the long night, Nahimana worked alongside Royce with a focus that shut out everything except the children's needs. She learned to read the subtle signs he looked for, the quality of breathing, the dampness of skin, the responsiveness of eyes. When a young boy started seizing from high fever, she was the one who held him steady while Royce administered emergency measures. Her strength used not to harm, but to prevent harm. The settlement leader, a man named Thomas, watched it all. Watched how Nahimana's large hands could be gentle with fragile children. Watched how she anticipated Royce's needs. How they communicated in shorthand built from 2 days of learning each other's methods. Watched how she sang quietly in Apache to soothe a crying girl, the melody soft and surprisingly sweet. By midnight, 2 of the children showed clear improvement. By pre-dawn, 4 were sleeping naturally instead of tossing in fever. The last 2, the youngest and the sickest, remained critical, but stable. Royce sat heavily on a chair, exhaustion written across his face. We might have gotten here in time. Might? Thomas asked. These 2, Royce gestured to the youngest children. Next 12 hours will tell. If the fever breaks by noon, they'll survive. If it doesn't, he didn't finish. Nahimana stood by the window, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. She felt Royce come up beside her, felt his presence like warmth. You were right, Thomas said from behind them. Both turned. The settlement leader looked tired but honest. About strength, about what matters. I was wrong to judge you by who your people are instead of who you are. You were protecting your own, Nahimana said. I understand that. I do the same. Maybe that's the problem, Thomas replied quietly. All of us so busy protecting our own that we forget we're all just people trying to survive. As morning light filled the infirmary, the youngest child, a girl of maybe 5, opened her eyes clearly for the first time in days. Her mother sobbed with relief. Within an hour, the last critical child also showed signs of fever breaking. They'd done it. Against time and distance and odds, they'd saved 6 children who would have died otherwise. Royce found Nahimana outside later, watching the settlement wake to a new day. You were extraordinary in there. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes it extraordinary. He stood beside her, close but not touching. You showed them that strength isn't about intimidation. It's about showing up when it matters and doing the hard work that saves lives. She turned to face him, and the morning light caught in her eyes, turning them warm amber. I learned that from watching you. You never once tried to prove you were strong enough to match me physically. You just proved you were strong enough to stand beside me anyway. The words hung between them, charged with everything they'd discovered over the past 3 days, about strength, about trust, about what it meant to truly see another person. Nahimana, Royce started, but before he could finish, Thomas approached. The children are stable. You're both free to rest, or to leave if you need to get back to your tribe. The reminder hit like cold water. The tribe, the elder, the choice she'd made that had consequences waiting back in the canyon. And Royce's mission was complete. The children were saved. His purpose fulfilled, which meant this journey that had changed everything was over. Unless they chose something different. They left the settlement at midday with the gratitude of 30 people who'd learned that prejudice was a luxury sick children couldn't afford. The ride back was quieter than the journey there had been. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with awareness that every mile brought them closer to decisions neither wanted to face. Nahimana rode her own horse again. The animal's leg recovered enough for light travel, and the distance between them felt both necessary and unbearable. You'll go back to your tribe, Royce said finally, breaking the silence as they paused to water the horses near the hidden valley where they'd camped before. I have to. Kohana and my grandmother, they need continued care. The elder needs to know I kept my word. She dismounted, not looking at him. And you'll continue moving, bringing medicine where it's needed, helping where you can. That was the plan. Was? Royce climbed down from his saddle, moved to stand near her. Not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt charged. I'm tired of running. Nahimana. Tired of moving so I don't have to feel what I've lost. These past days with you I've felt something I thought died with my mother. Purpose that isn't just distraction. Connection that isn't just obligation. She turned to face him, and he saw the conflict in her eyes. Want warring with duty, hope fighting with fear. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time I stopped running. Found a place to stand still for a while. He took a breath, steadying himself. Near your canyon maybe. Close enough to help when needed. Far enough to respect boundaries. There are other settlements in this territory that need supplies, need medicine, need someone who knows how to move through harsh country. You'd stay? In this region? If you wanted me to. If you thought... He stopped. Started again more honestly. I've watched you be strong for everyone else for days now. Let me be strong enough to stand beside you. Not to protect you, you don't need that. But to share the weight when it gets too heavy to carry alone. Nahimana felt something crack in her chest. Felt the walls she'd built over years begin to crumble in a way that was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I spent my whole life proving no man was strong enough for me. I built that identity, that reputation. What happens if I let it go? You don't have to let it go. You just have to add something to it. Royce moved closer. Close enough now that she could see the hope and fear reflected in his expression. Could see that he was just as vulnerable in this moment as she was. You're still the strongest person I've ever met. But maybe you don't have to be strong alone anymore. Maybe that's what real strength looks like, knowing when to let someone in. And what do you get out of this? Her voice came out rough. Why would you give up moving freely to stay near someone who's more comfortable fighting than anything else? Because when I look at you, I don't see someone who's comfortable fighting. I see someone who learned to fight because that's what survival demanded. I see someone who wants permission to be more than just a wall. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and took her hand. His fingers looked small against hers, but his grip was steady. I see someone worth standing still for, worth building something with if she'll have me. Nahimana looked down at their joined hands, her scarred, calloused fingers wrapped around his. She thought about her grandmother, who'd taught her that real strength was knowing when to fight and when to heal. She thought about the past 3 days, about working beside Royce to save children, about feeling seen instead of used, about discovering that vulnerability could be power instead of weakness. I told my tribe I was going to ensure you kept your word about never revealing our location, she said quietly. I told myself that was the reason I came with you. What was the real reason? I wanted to find out who I was when I wasn't being everyone's weapon. I wanted to see if maybe, somewhere under all this strength I built to survive, there was someone who could just be. She looked up, met his eyes. You showed me that person exists, that she's not weaker than the warrior everyone else needs, just different. And I don't want to go back to being only a weapon. I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone, proving I don't need anyone. She squeezed his hand. But I can't abandon my tribe either. They need protection. They need someone who can protect them without destroying herself in the process. Royce interrupted gently. Someone who knows that taking care of herself isn't selfishness, that accepting help isn't weakness. Is that what you'd be? Help? I'd be whatever you need me to be. Partner, friend, someone who understands that loving someone strong doesn't mean trying to make them weak. It means being strong enough to stand beside them. The word hung between them. Loving. Neither had said it directly before, but there it was. Simple and true and terrifying. I don't know how to do this, Nahimana admitted. How to be someone's partner. How to let someone see me as more than just strength. Neither do I, Royce said honestly. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are. She studied his face. The scars. The sadness that still lived in his eyes. The steadiness that had never wavered even when facing her at her most intimidating. She thought about what he'd said days ago, about his mother believing complexity was just an excuse for not doing what you knew you should. This was simple, really. Scary, uncertain, risky, but simple. She wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted the possibility of being more than just what everyone else needed her to be. Okay, she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. Okay, you stay near the canyon. You help the settlements in this region. I protect my tribe and learn how to stop using strength as armor. She took a shaky breath. And we figure out what it means to be strong together instead of strong alone. Together, Royce repeated. And the smile that crossed his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. He pulled her closer, and she let him. Let herself be held by someone whose strength wasn't about dominating, but about supporting. When he kissed her, it was gentle and fierce and full of promise. The kind that said this wasn't an ending but a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Nahimana laughed, a sound she couldn't remember making in years. My tribe is going to think I've lost my mind. Maybe you have. Maybe we both have. Royce grinned. But I'd rather be crazy with you than sane and alone. They rode back to the canyon together as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold. When they reached the tribal camp, the elder met them with suspicion that softened into surprise when he saw how Nahimana carried herself, still strong, still capable, but with something new in her expression, something that looked like peace. The children? The elder asked. Saved. All of them. Nahimana dismounted, helped Royce with the packs. And I've decided Royce will be staying in this region. He'll help settlements. Bring medicine. Trade fairly with us when we need supplies. You trust him? Nahimana looked at Royce, who waited quietly, letting her handle her tribe her way. I trust him. More than that, I choose him. As partner, as ally, as someone who showed me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. The elder studied them both for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Your grandmother would approve. She always said you'd find your balance when you met someone who could match your strength without trying to break it. As the sun set over the canyon, Nahimana stood beside Royce, his hand in hers, and realized the title she'd worn for years, the woman no man was strong enough for, hadn't been wrong. It had just been incomplete. She'd needed someone strong enough not to compete with her strength, but to complement it. Someone who saw her power and matched it with his own kind of courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to stay instead of run, to build instead of survive. She'd spent years saying no man was strong enough for her. She'd been right, until she met the one who was. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more stories like this. Your support means everything.